interviewing a lot of innovators here in recent history, and man, you guys are just incredible and fascinating and motivating to be around. So thank you for coming. I love what you're doing. So,
well, thank you, and it's an honor to be here.
I got a question. How long did it take you to get here from Denver?
It's about 2 hours and 10 minutes.
2 hours and 10 minutes?
If all the flights are about that long, we'd be doing okay.
You're not flying on the new jet, huh?
Not yet. You know, I have committed I will be in the first test flight myself. So that I'm very much looking forward to. And I joke. So we just finished with our XB1, our sort of our 1/3 scale demonstrator airplane, and I'd love to go, hot wire that thing and make it my own personal airplane.
I'll bet you and just about everybody else would love that. But, well, hey, I want to get in to how you got into this and all about what you're doing right now. But first, every guest starts off with an introduction here. So, Blake Scholl, the founder of Boom Supersonic, a company you started in 2014 to bring supersonic air travel back to the mainstream. Challenged a 52-year-old ban on supersonic flight over land, helping to reverse it in just 115 days. A self-taught leader behind the world's first independently developed supersonic jet, the XB1, which broke the sound barrier 6 times this year without an audible sonic boom. The architect of Overture, the fastest airliner in development, set to fly at Mach 1.7 with 130 orders from major airlines. Earned your private pilot's license in 2008 and an instrument rating in 2011. A former Amazon software engineer who at just 24 managed 300 million P&L. Like I said, I love what you're doing. You are reinventing commercial air travel. It sounds like the XB1 can make, is it from New York to Paris in under 4 hours?
Under 4 hours.
That's incredible. Before we get too far, how would this be used for CONUS travel, or is it only overseas flights?
Well, now that we've cracked sonic boom, and that the president has now signed an executive order to legalize supersonic flight in the U.S., it can be used for CONUS too. So you can leave New York at 9 a.m. and land in San Francisco at 9:30 a.m. San Francisco time.
That's crazy.
It's gonna be so great.
That is. And you know what I love when I was going over the outline downstairs? I mean, I love that you started this in your basement with cardboard cutouts of what you thought it would look like. And now here we are today with the model and the test flights and 130 orders. And it's just, I love these stories that somebody that just started something from scratch. You didn't have any education you weren't in aerospace.
No, I had no formal training in this. And yeah, it seems a little surreal. So on Father's Day, I took my dad and my twin boys to the new R&D facility we're building in Denver, and we've got our test airplane there. And so we opened up the cockpit and I let them all get in it. And I was flipping through my phone, and you know how it shows you photos from way back. And there was one of them from 9 years earlier in the plywood and cardboard mock-up of that airplane.
Oh, man.
And I was just looking back at it. I don't know why any of us believed. I don't know. We somehow believed it ourselves. I don't know how in the world we got anybody else to believe in it. Because it looks, quite a bit different from an actual real supersonic jet.
Man, it's amazing what you're doing. But everybody gets a gift.
Oh, thank you.
Vigilance Elite Gummy Bears, legal in all 50 states, although you don't have to worry about that living in Colorado. So, but
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. When I moved
to Colorado, I told my friends I was doing it to start a company, and everyone thought it was going to be a weed company. And I thought, it's actually a different kind of getting high, people. Different kind of getting high. But I've got something for you also, if I can try it out here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a pretty special artifact. This is that flew on the first supersonic flight of XB1. So that has gone supersonic.
Oh man, thank you.
And so that's numbered. I think that's number 60. They're not that many of those.
It is number 60. Thank you. Very cool. Very cool. And then one more thing before we get going, I have a Patreon account, and it's a community of all the people that have been with me here since the beginning, and it just continues to grow, and we've grown it into quite the community. And so one of the things I do is I offer them the opportunity to ask each and every guest a question. And so this is from Richard Beamer. Blake, what did you learn from working for others like Amazon and Groupon that helped you in your field of supersonic travel?
Oh boy, so much. I was, so Amazon was my first job out of school, and I'll date myself in this. It was 2001. So I was something like engineer number 200 at Amazon. So it was early compared to today, but not ultra early. And it was my first real job. So I didn't know what a great company looked like versus crappy company. So I spent about 5 years there, and ultimately I left feeling frustrated with what I thought the problems were. And then after that, I was part of a couple different startups, one that I founded and we sold to Groupon. And after having spent time at Groupon, I learned how lucky I was to be at Amazon. The companies all like to say all these great things about themselves, their principle, they make long-term decisions, they care about their customers, et cetera, et cetera. The hard part is actually doing the real work. And so when I can look at what Amazon would do versus what Groupon would do, again, back then, just a huge study in contrast of who were actually the long-term thinkers, who were actually principled, who was willing to take short-term pain for the long-term right outcome. And Amazon, this is really very much Jeff's leadership, built that. And Groupon didn't have it. And I think it's the reason that approximately Groupon doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm. We haven't heard of it in years.
Right.
I've not heard of that. Well, let's move into, how did you get started? You went from Amazon to your company that you sold to Groupon. How did you get in? What is it with aerospace?
For some of us, there's just this magical flight thing, and it's a bug that bites us, and it never gets out. I remember taking my first flying lesson when I was an intern in college, working in the Bay Area, and I'll never forget that first takeoff. It was just magical. It was just sort of this experience of, holy crap, I have my life in my own hands, and also I have my life in my own hands. So it was both scary and empowering. And I've loved flight ever since. When I was in my 20s working at this startup in Seattle, there was one of the final Concordes had been put out to the museum there, and I went and saw it. I remember looking at the Concorde. I remember looking at the SR-71 Blackbird and thinking, like, how is it that the most amazing military airplane and the most amazing commercial airplane are both found in a museum, not in the skies? And I put a Google alert on Supersonic Jet that day, and I figured someone's going to obviously fix this. This was like 2007, so Concorde had been gone for about 4 years. And I thought, okay, somebody else is going to fix this. I want to be first to know I could buy a ticket. I still have this email I wrote to my girlfriend about how much better our life would have been, if she'd been able to show up at Mach 2. And for basically a decade, it was just crickets. There was some talk of a supersonic private jet for the ultra wealthy. But I looked at Concorde, and I was at Amazon when Concorde got shut down. I never got to fly on it. Why? It's a $20,000 ticket.
Mm-hmm.
That was for royalty and rock stars. And I don't have anything against private jets. I think they should exist. I think we should have supersonic private jets. But the big problem with Concorde was it wasn't affordable. And so meanwhile, I'd had this experience of starting my first company and selling it to Groupon. And it was, I'd been at Amazon, so I thought I knew e-commerce. And then I'd been at this other startup that was building mobile apps, so I thought I knew mobile. And what everyone tells you is you should work on what you're good at. And so I thought I should work on mobile e-commerce. And so I end up, I can't say this with a straight face. I built a mobile barcode scanning game. And it's like the least important thing I could possibly work on. And I would, and yet, like, there's no such thing as an easy startup. I was worried I'd lose all the investors' money. I was at times super depressed. And I'd wake up and think like, why did I get into this? How do I get out of it? And so when I had a chance to kind of sell the company to Groupon and the investors got their money back in a little bit, it was my escape fantasy had come true. Nonetheless, I had loved that experience of being my own boss, of creating something from scratch. And I just figured, man, I just want to invert every decision I made at that company. And I never want to work on something where I have to ask myself, is it worth it? So after a couple years at Groupon, having gone one level from barcode scanning game to internet coupon, I just couldn't, I couldn't take any more of those phone calls saying, send more email, Blake. And fired myself. And I thought, let me put all my startup ideas in order of how happy I would be if it worked.
How many startup ideas did you have?
I was looking at my notes from this a couple of weeks ago because I actually kept a journal back then, and there were probably a couple dozen.
I'm just curious. What were some of the other ideas?
Oh, they were terrible.
Were they all in aerospace?
Some of them were, and some of them, I had an idea for a better rental car company. I had an idea. Probably the most promising thing I had on the list was a convenience-oriented airline that would fly out of private terminals rather than commercial terminals. And it turned out somebody else did that. That became basically JSX.
Okay.
And I'm a big fan of that. But I ended up saying I want to just focus on what would be most awesome if it worked, and I'll leave everything else aside, including whether I think I personally have any business working on it. I remember when I decided I wanted to do supersonic, I remember calling my mom and telling her, and she said, Blake, shouldn't you work on something you know something about? And it's what every mom would say, right? Because it's the conventional standard advice to work on what you know about. And I think the actual much better thing is to work on what you love. So if you stop any successful entrepreneur, on the day they make it, let's say day of IPO, and you say, hey, of what you know today, how much of it did you know on the day you started? And I think the answer would be almost none. You have to learn the vast majority of how you scale a company and how you lead an organization and how you sell and blah, blah, blah. Everybody has to get reinvented along this journey. Mm-hmm. You're going to learn 99% new stuff. So why not learn 99.5% new stuff and work on something that you really, really love? So I sort of said, okay, I'm going to look at this supersonic thing. And I thought I would get 2 weeks into it and be done with it.
That had to be the intimidation factor had to be pretty high.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the weirdest thing was, so I got slightly down path with it over a few months of expecting that I was going to talk myself out of it. But every time I would go and study something, I would just find that the conventional wisdom was wrong, and that anybody with a spreadsheet and a web browser could build a basic model that said you should be able to fly supersonic with today's technology. So I took an airplane design class. I put myself through remedial calculus and physics because I hadn't had any since high school. I remember in the middle of 2014, I had a spreadsheet model of the airplane and a spreadsheet model of the market. And I took them both to a professor at Stanford. And I said, dude, would you look at this? Because I don't know what I'm doing. But if my math is right, this is all practical. And he looks at it and he clicks around and he says, Blake, if you're going to actually consider this, you need to be more aggressive. All your assumptions are conservative. And I remember leaving his office and thinking, either I have no courage or I'm going to try to find some great people and go do this. And that was the weirdest part, is I'm like, who am I to go build a supersonic jet company? And, I would tell my friends I was looking at it and I could just see their eyes roll back. And I struggled with my own ego a lot in that, because it's such a bold declaration to say I'm going to go build a supersonic airliner. If it works, I'm almost definitionally part of history. And so I'm declaring to myself and my friends that I'm going to try to be a historic figure. That was really weird. And I think man, does this make me somebody really arrogant to even go try this? And I struggled with it. And I remember thinking back about Bill Gates' story, who'd been one of my heroes in high school. And he had famously, I think in the late 70s, said that his goal for Microsoft was to put a personal computer in every home and on every desk running Microsoft software. And he said that in, I don't know, something like 78. And then he did that and then some. And so I tried to ask myself, what was it like to be Bill Gates and say that? He wouldn't have succeeded if he hadn't gone for it. And it wouldn't have happened on one hand. On the other hand, they're probably, like, I think of it as the dark matter of entrepreneurs. The people who try for big missions and go for it and don't make it. And we don't know who they are. Their names are lost to history. But they knew who they are, and they know they gave it their all. And for me, the choice was, I'd rather be embarrassed in front of my friends. I'd rather be in the dark matter of entrepreneurs than be 80 or 90 years old, looking back and thinking, I would have loved to work on supersonic flight. What would have happened if I tried?
Yeah, I can relate to that in other aspects. Who was the first person that believed in you?
Avichal Garg was at least the first person to say he believed in me. This was somebody I'd gone to high school with in Cincinnati who had gone on. He'd sold a company to Facebook. He'd been quite successful in his own right. And I remember I was having lunch with him at the Facebook cafeteria when I was thinking about all this stuff, and I kind of gave him the pitch. And he says, Blake, you should do it. And I was like, really? No one else says that. And years later, he told me that he actually thought I was crazy. But he could tell I was just so darn passionate about it, he didn't have the heart to tell me not to.
No kidding.
And so I think the reality was, on day one, nobody believed it, not even me.
Wow. How old were you when you decided to make the shift?
33.
33 years old. Wow. And how long after you decided to do it did you start the company? And I mean, when did the cardboard cutouts and all that kind of stuff start happening?
Yeah, let's see. So I left Groupon in something like March of 2014. And then I set the company up on paper in September of that year. I sort of decided...
Oh, quick.
Well, to me, that feels slow. But
really?
Yeah, I had in my head that I would take a few months off. And I think I only took a few weeks off before I really got focused on it. It was around that time, I was still living in California. I hadn't moved to Denver yet. And I think I had some, folding chairs and some, plastic tubes that I was using in my basement just by myself to try and figure out how small could you make an airliner and still have it be comfortable. The diameter of these things matters for the fuel efficiency. And then I moved to Denver in early 2015 and hired our first few people. And one of the first things we did is start building mock-ups.
And you're doing your own engine. You're doing everything.
We're doing our own engines. We're not doing our own everything. But I've become a big believer that if there is a custom part needed on the airplane, it's much better to vertically integrate it than to outsource it.
Summer's here, and if you're anything like me, you didn't spend the winter just sitting around. You stayed sharp and kept moving. And now it's time your gear caught up. And that's why I want to introduce you to Roka. I've been looking for eyewear that can handle any situation with performance and style. And let me tell you, these aren't your average shades. I've tested them in the real world from shooting to fishing to off-roading, and they hold up. They're lightweight, don't slide around on my face, and can take a hit without falling apart. And the best part, they look good. They're clean and modern, no frills here, just premium eyewear that performs without compromise. That's something that I respect, and that's also why every time I head out the door, I reach for my Roka shades. Roka's based in Austin, Texas, American designed, no cut corners. The optics are crystal clear, cut through glare, and the fit stays comfortable all day long. Need a prescription? They've got you covered with both sunglasses and eyeglasses. Not only does Roka have awesome shades, they also have these that protect you against blue light. I wear these every night when I'm winding down for the day, and I still got to look at my phone or my laptop or my iPad. It just helps you wind down, and get ready for bed. They are a one-stop shop for eyewear that's built to handle whatever life throws at you. Roca is the real deal. Ready to upgrade your eyewear? Check them out for yourself at roca.com and use code SRS for 20% off site-wide at checkout. That's ROKA.com. Let's talk about, you'd overturned, in 115 days, now we can do supersonic travel. And so how did that all come about?
Yeah, so it was actually not part of the original plan.
Really?
Yeah, so everyone thinks that the point of the whole company was to solve sonic boom, and so of course we were going to go demonstrate the sonic boom solution. Of course we were going to push for the repeal of the supersonic ban, and that was actually not the plan on day one. The plan on day one was let's assume we can't change any regulations, and let's keep the plan as simple as it possibly can be, and still find a big enough market. So that was so what happened was. In January, January of this year, we did our first supersonic test flight, January 28th. And in the run up to that, I asked the team, I was like, hey, we're going to go fly supersonic. We should probably know what kind of sonic boom we're going to make. So we can expect it, set people's expectations, be able to talk about it, and I kind of wanted to be told, oh, it's going to be a real wallop. Wanted to enjoy that. And the team came back and said, no, we've been talking for years about this thing called Mach cutoff, where the boom doesn't reach the ground and you don't hear anything. And we're going to be in Mach cutoff. So there's not going to be a sonic boom. And I was actually a little disappointed. So we went and we did that test flight. We broke the sound barrier three times in Mach cutoff, boomless condition. Microphones on the ground confirmed it. And then I'm on X and I'm just talking with people. And the plan had been, this is a transoceanic airplane. It's not a CONUS airplane. And the internet is convinced that we're all about solving sonic boom, and I can't convince people that wasn't the point. And I remember thinking about, wait a minute, we did this thing in boomless cruise, and this physics called Mach cutoff that we can get into how that works. And we looked at it for the Overture airliner and decided it wasn't practical because when we were building on these outsourced engines, it wasn't. You have to, in order to do this boomless thing, you have to break the sound barrier at a sufficiently high altitude that the boom can make a U-turn in the sky and never touch the ground. And the Rolls-Royce engines couldn't do it. So we sort of put it aside as impractical. But meanwhile, we started designing our own engines and optimizing them. And every time I go to these engineering meetings, I was like, well, the transonic Excel altitude just went up 1,000 feet, went up another 1,000 feet, another 1,000 feet. And I started thinking, well, what if the internet is right and I'm wrong? And so we called an emergency Saturday engineering meeting. And I said, team, we've got different engines than last time we did this analysis. We need to rerun the analysis on Overture. Can we do boomless cruise? And it took 90 minutes. And they said, thumbs up, it just works.
No kidding.
And so the next thing I did is I called the marketing team and I said, we're going to relaunch the company around boomless cruise. Everyone's going to think it was the plan all along. But we just figured it out.
Man, so let's just go back. I got a lot of questions. Actually, let's talk about a sonic boom and what it is.
Yeah. So a sonic boom is the sound an airplane makes while it's flying supersonic. You can think of it as kind of like the wake of a boat.
Okay.
A boat's going sufficiently fast, it's going to make a wake. The wake's going to propagate outwards, and you notice it when it hits you. And so a big boats make a big wake, right? A small boat's going to make a smaller wake. The boat's right next to you, you're going to feel the wake more strongly than if it's further away. And a lot of that is the way sonic boom works. Big airplanes are going to make bigger sonic booms, but the further away they are, the less you hear. And then there's a distinction with booms that doesn't occur with wakes, which is they curve as they move. And they do that because there's a temperature gradient in the atmosphere. It's, of course, it's cold up high and it's warmer down low. That temperature gradient creates a speed of sound gradient. So the speed of sound is higher the warmer it is,
okay,
lower the cooler it is. And so the refraction happens. Whenever a wave moves through something where its speed changes, it turns in the direction of lower speed. So imagine like you're driving your car and your inside wheels are moving slower than your outside wheels. You're going to turn towards the inside. So that when light refracts, that's why. When sound refracts, that's why. And so the sonic boom, which is this sort of compressed air band that comes off the airplane when it's flying supersonic, makes, it turns as it goes through the sky. And so if it comes off the airplane at a sufficiently shallow angle and the airplane is sufficiently high, you've got this gigantic U in the sky. And if the bottom of the U never touches the ground, nobody hears any boom.
Gotcha.
And so this is the easy solution for sonic boom. For 50 years, people have talked about it like it's this boogeyman that's going to require, decades of R&D. Turns out this is a software solution. You just need today's weather data and an algorithm, and it tells you what speed and altitude to fly. And then there's no boom.
No kidding.
It's actually really simple.
Wow.
We can talk about why people have made it out to be a harder problem than it is.
Let's do it.
I think there is so like NASA, for example, has been working on sonic boom suppression for decades. And they've got this R&D airplane called the X-59 that they've been working on it for longer than Boom has existed as a company. And it hasn't flown yet. They're going about this with completely different physics. It's this very long, skinny airplane, which I think is part of why it hasn't flown yet. It's really hard to make that work. And the idea is if you stretch the airplane out, it kind of spreads the boom out across more time. And so when you hear it, it's quieter.
Okay.
And that thing can go up to Mach 1.4. Boomless tops out at about Mach 1.3, so they can go very slightly faster. But that's hard mode. Well, okay. Well, why do it on hard mode? Well, if it's not really hard, I don't think you can justify the research program. So I think there's this dynamic around some of these R&D type efforts where the incentive for the people working on them is to make the challenge sufficiently hard that it justifies the program.
Interesting. I mean, just to start that company, you're going up against Boeing. You have the regulations, the speed regulations. What was the speed regulation?
It says thou shalt not exceed Mach 1, the speed of sound.
It's
a dumb regulation.
You've got some hurdles, and you have no background in aviation or aerospace. And how did you, when you, as the founder of the company, how did you, those are some major hurdles to get over.
Right? Well, I remember sitting in my basement thinking, okay, take my own ego out of this. Just imagine it's the year 2050. Mm-hmm. And I'm retired and I'm sitting on the beach sipping Mai Tais and I'm reading, aviation history. How do I think it goes? Do I think after 150 years of not doing supersonic, Boeing or Airbus finally do it? No, of course not. That history never goes that way. The big guys never suddenly get enlightened. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, do I think we're still going subsonic? Sheesh, I hope not. Okay. So if we're not going subsonic and Boeing and Airbus didn't do it, how would it happen? And I just started imagining how that history would go, without me being part of it. Okay, it'd have to be an effort from outside the industry. Nobody who had spent their careers at Boeing or Airbus would ever do it because they'd have learned all the reasons why it's impossible. It'd have to be somebody from outside the industry. And what would the attributes of that effort have to look like? And what would the leaders of that effort have to look like? Well, you'd have to be incredibly passionate about the mission because it would be long and hard. And if you didn't care about it and you were sane, you'd give up. So mission passion, mission orientation would matter. Being able to tell the story of why supersonic would matter would be really important because that would be the only way you could get a dream team together. And this would need a dream team. And so the ability to storytell, the ability to be persuasive, the ability to be a minnow that gets sharks to come swim with you. The startup would have to go get these airlines that are used to buying Boeing and Airbus airplanes to go buy airplanes from a startup instead. It would require this incredible power of persuasion, of perseverance. And so I put that aside and I looked in the mirror and I said, do I look like the CEO for this? And the answer was not at all. I didn't know anything about the industry. I don't think I could have sold you a dollar bill for 50 cents. And so I said, okay, well, and a lot of these things I was really insecure about. I was insecure about networking. I was insecure about sales. And I asked myself, well, what mattered more, my insecurity or my passion for this idea? And I said, okay, Blake, if you want to actually do this, you have to become that person. And I have to be willing to reinvent myself. And I have to do that continuously along the way. And so I sort of set out to become what my idea was of the right kind of leader for it.
Gotcha. Let's talk about, so it sounds like Concorde was the main inspiration, correct?
Well, it was an existence proof, right? Like in some ways, I think it requires way more courage to go off and create something of a category that's never existed before. Mm-hmm. And Concorde existed. In fact, it was done in the 1960s. It just wasn't done in a way that made it make any sense. Like, nobody could afford to fly on it. So it was sort of dead on arrival.
So this goes all the way back to the 60s?
Concorde was established as a joint venture between the French and British governments by treaty in 1962.
Wow.
And it first flew in 1969, within months of the moon landing.
Wow. Who was using it?
So British Airways and Air France were the only two airlines that really operated it for any length of time. And the tickets were adjusted for inflation north of $20,000. So this was really for the royalty and rock stars. Mm-hmm. Who could drop a whole lot of coin to go somewhere really fast. It was not practical the way it was done then.
How long did it run for?
27 years.
27 years?
Yeah. Shut down in 2003, really with no plan to replace it.
Why was it shut down?
So the proximal cause was it was just too expensive. At this point, the successor entity of the companies that had made it was Airbus. And the market was tiny. It had always been tiny for Concorde, and they were having to make spare parts and whatnot. And Air France wasn't making any money flying it. And so the story I've heard is that Air France and Airbus kind of got together and said, let's just stop doing spare parts for this, and then the British will have to stop flying it too, and it'll force the whole fleet down. So that happened. It was. I don't know if the conspiracy theory is exactly true, but I think the reality was it died. It was stillborn. This was an airplane with 100 seats on it, mind you, 100 uncomfortable seats. Like you could think they were out of back of Ryanair or something. Not a comfortable airplane. $20,000 ticket, 100 seats to fill. That just doesn't work. You can't find 100 people that want to drop 20 grand to go somewhere all at the same time. That's why they only ever had 14.
Interesting. So 100 seats, $20,000 a ticket, and then so it was actually the company that deep sixed it. It wasn't the regulations.
I think it was not the company. The French and British governments spec'd it. So let's. I think this is a big piece of kind of what went wrong in aerospace in the 1960s. So one of my controversial opinions is that Concorde killed supersonic flight. It never should have existed. And Apollo killed space exploration. And it also should not have gone to the moon in 1969. And a lot of people, and I loved Concorde and I loved Apollo, but I don't think they helped us. And if that seems like a crazy thing, just notice it's 2025 and we can't fly supersonic and we can't land on the moon. Mm-hmm. So these things that we were told in the 1960s were the harbingers of great progress didn't pan out the way it was predicted. So why? And I think the answer is that for the first 50 years, from the Wright brothers forward, innovation in aerospace was commercially driven. It was you're building a commercial airplane that passengers got to be able to afford to fly on, that airlines want to operate profitably. Nobody build a machine unless they at least believed it was going to make economic sense. And then if you're building military machines, they had to make sense for that mission. And so there was a commercial hand saying it's got to make sense, or there's a military hand saying it's got to make sense. But either way, something's keeping us grounded. And in the 60s, we pivoted to Cold War era national prestige as the motivation. And so there was a Soviet project to create a supersonic airliner. There was a European project to create a supersonic airliner. And there was an American project to create a supersonic airliner called the SST. And in all three cases, they were government funded and they were government spec'd. And the result was everybody was building products that show technological superiority, not products that made any commercial sense. So Concorde and the Soviet airplane were very similar. The American airplane was going to be 300 seats in Mach 3. So it made even less economic sense than Concorde did. And then what happened is the American, so Congress pulled the plug appropriately on the American supersonic airplane. Concorde and Concordski were still coming. And now all of a sudden, it was not obvious back then just how economically dead on arrival Concorde was going to be. And so then America responded trying to protect Boeing by banning supersonic flight over land.
That's what it was.
That's what it was. This
was to protect Boeing?
This was protectionism. It was as long as Boeing's building a supersonic airplane, it was all fine. That project gets canceled, all of a sudden we can't have that sonic stuff. It's terrible. And I think the real tell was if it had been about sonic boom being bad, it would have been a noise limit, not a speed limit. Literally, it banned supersonic flight in the U.S.
Why would the government be protecting Boeing?
Regulatory capture?
It just...
I mean, that happens all the time, right? I think an enormous amount of the regulations that we have in any industry today are there to protect the incumbents.
So they set up a lobbying. They lobbied to put a speed limit in place so that they could have no competitors, even knowing that they had no ambition to become a competitor in supersonic.
I mean, I don't know exactly how it went, so I'm speculating a bit. But we had European and Russian government-funded projects to build a supersonic airliner. The U.S. taxpayer funding and Boeing to do the same thing had just been pulled. And so I could imagine saying, hey, that's Boeing saying, hey, that's unfair. You got to protect me from that. Mm-hmm. If you're not going to subsidize me the way the other guys were subsidized, then at least block them so they can't do anything here. And then there was the public story was all about how bad these airplanes were going to be noise-wise and environmentally. And a thing I've come to believe is every bad regulation tends to have a moral cover story that's believable. We can't disturb sleeping babies and break windows. Mm-hmm. And then there's a real motivation, which is Boeing doesn't want to compete with Concorde. Which you would never, they would never say out loud. They can only say the other stuff. And so it's plausible sounding, but there's a more sinister actual motivation.
And you've been in business for 10 years.
A little more than 10.
11 years?
It'll be 11 in September.
Yeah. So 11 years. And just in the past 115 days, you were able to get that ban. So, I mean, how did you get around that for the first 10 years?
Well, we had a business plan that didn't need it. As it turns out, there are about 600 routes around the planet that are primarily transoceanic. Not just New York, London, but Miami to Madrid and Seattle to Tokyo and LA to Sydney, where most of the flying's over water where there is no speed limit.
Okay.
Right? And so our basic idea was, so Concorde missed on cost and it missed on comfort. So we got to solve those problems. We got to make the seats nicer and we got to get the cost down to the point that more people can afford to fly it. And today, there's really nice flatbed seats at the front of the airplane in business or first class for international flights, right? Mm. And people pay top dollar, 5, 10, 15, sometimes 20 grand to be up there. And the whole premise is, I hate the flight as long. Give me a flying bed so I can sleep through it. But of course, if you make the flight twice as fast, you don't need the bed anymore. The experience could be more like flying first class domestically. And so the basic idea was, can we improve upon the efficiency of Concorde enough that people would be able to trade a flying bed for a supersonic seat instead, and sleep at home, not on the airplane. Mm-hmm. And to do that, you need a remarkably small improvement versus Concorde. Like the math closes at less than 10% improvement versus 1960s technology. Now we found a lot more than 10%. We put all the extra into making the seats nicer and the airplane more comfortable. But that was that was the basic idea. And if you just run the math, which for some reason I think I was just the first person who actually ran the math, there was plenty of business, in 2010s, 2020s, 2030s kind of travel demand in business class on these international routes if you can make the fares similar to what people were already paying, not stratospheric like Concorde. So that was the original plan. We didn't need to solve sonic boom. We thought we'd do that in version 2. But it turned out it was easier than anybody said. And so my experience getting that changed was, so on February 10th, we did our second supersonic flight on XB1, and we announced boomless cruise. And that night I flew to DC on this horrific flight that should have been supersonic. And by the time I landed in DC, I had an invitation to the West Wing. And so we started our lobby campaign that day. And I tweeted about boomless cruise, and Elon had responded and said, yeah, we should get rid of dumb regulations like this. So we had a bunch of people who were supporting it. And so I spent time, in the White House. I spent time with Congress. I spent time with the FAA. And I basically said, look, if we were proposing to make sonic booms, we'd have to have an argument about are they too loud or not. And reasonable people might differ on how loud is too loud and how quiet is quiet enough. But we can do this in a way that there is no audible sonic boom. So there's nothing to disagree about.
How was that received?
Universally, people were excited. So there was a bipartisan bill that got introduced in the House and in the Senate called the Supersonic Aviation Modernization Act. That basically said, hey, FAA, go rewrite your rules so that you can fly supersonic without a boom, you're allowed. And so that got introduced very quickly. Senator Budd introduced it in the Senate, and Representative Troy Nehls introduced it in the House. We had bipartisan support on the House, and meanwhile, I think the president looked at it, and he loved Concorde. There's this beautiful video clip of him talking about how it was the most beautiful airplane ever and never really should have gone away. And he said, well, I can do it faster than Congress. I'm going to do an executive order. And so he did.
Nice. Look, how do you see your company fitting into the world? I mean, is this going to be, we kind of talked about it, I think downstairs. I don't think it was on here yet, but is this going to be CONUS? Is it going to be just overseas flights?
Yeah, well, I think
who's going to be able to afford it? All this stuff.
Well, let's start with the vision, and we can work backwards to how we get there.
Okay.
I want to replace subsonic with supersonic for every passenger on every route, at least every long route. For the president, all the way down to families.
What's a long route?
Anything that's more than 3 or 4 hours today.
Okay.
You can kind of argue where the threshold is, where the speed really makes a big difference. I mean, I haven't found anything in the world I don't think I would be better off faster. I think everything's better faster. But for flights, over 3 or 4 hours, you can argue cutting it in half is meaningful. So ultimately, if we want to enable more people to go more places more often, we need the flights to be faster. We need to delete the terrible hassle and inconvenience that is air travel today. And we need to get the cost down as much as we can so that cost isn't a barrier to actually going. That's the ultimate goal. To confine subsonic jets to the airplane boneyards, put them in museums where they belong. But it'll take a few iterations to get there. So Overture, which is this airplane, the first commercial airplane, starts all business class. So you can kind of think of, if for people who know the Tesla story, our XB1 supersonic demonstrator, it's kind of like the Tesla Roadster. It proved you can do it.
Okay.
Not, the airplane was really just for a test pilot. Prove we could do it. Prove the technology was there. Okay, the first product is kind of like the Model S. A lot of people can afford to drive a Model S, but not everybody. Mm-hmm. And then we take everything we learn from that airplane and we'll build a second generation, larger airplane that's even more affordable. And it'll probably take 2 or 3 kind of iteration cycles to the point where anybody who wants to fly supersonic will be able to afford to fly supersonic.
No kidding. And how many passengers do you think it'll hold?
Ultimately, there's going to be a whole family of airplanes. The way you make commercial airliner economics work is you need to size the airplane for the market it flies on. So you want bigger airplanes to support city pairs that have more traffic. You want smaller airplanes to be able to fly between city pairs that have less traffic. So there'll probably be a whole family of airplanes of different sizes. There's no upper limit to scaling. There is a slight advantage in smaller airplanes because they can work economically on more direct flights. Nobody wants to go to a hub and change airplanes, right? But if you can make an efficient long-range airplane with a smaller number of seats on it, then you can connect more cities directly. And that's an added speed benefit. So there's going to be a whole family of airplanes here.
Gotcha. And when do you think these will be implemented?
Our goal is to have the first Overture roll out in a little over 2 years in 2027.
Wow.
Fly in 28. Our goal is to be certified in 29 and, hand them over to airlines in 30. So 5 years is the goal.
Will you be your own airline or will you sell to the airlines?
No, we'll sell. We have sold to airlines. So United was first to announce that they'd put an order in with a non-refundable deposit. American Airlines did the same thing. Japan Airlines was the first to do a pre-order. And I think ultimately every international airline is going to need to have this because it's what their passengers want. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have it, you're going to be left behind.
Mm-hmm. What about infrastructure as far as airports? Are they going to need longer runways? Is there only certain airports that can handle a jet like that? I mean, what are some of those kind of hurdles, if there are any?
Yeah, we've worked real hard to make sure there aren't any. So any airport that can handle a Boeing 777 can handle an Overture jet. So it works with existing runways, existing jetways, existing terminals. It can run on sustainable fuel, but can also run on today's fuels. So this drops right into the air travel ecosystem that exists today, and in a way that Concorde didn't. Concorde needed an extra long runway, and it came in really fast, and so it was disruptive for air traffic control. We've been able to solve all those problems.
Really? What about the pilots? Do you need specific pilots?
Like any airplane, you got to learn to fly it. Mm-hmm. But it'll be like going from a Boeing to an Airbus as far as pilot training. In fact, probably a little bit easier. This is the first brand new airliner cockpit in about 40 years.
Wow.
And so if you come
40 years?
It's been 40 years since anyone did a brand new airliner cockpit versus they take the last one and they tweak it. And so we get to do a fundamental rethink. And if you come out to Denver, we got to get you to fly it. Because we've got a flight simulator, and it's so much easier to fly than a Boeing or Airbus. It's like going from a BlackBerry to an iPhone.
No kidding.
Like we got rid of all the knobs and switches and buttons, except a handful that are really important for safety, and everything else is a big touchscreen. And it's really nice. And so you don't need to be some hot shit military pilot to fly this thing. It's a little scary to say it, but we're designing it for the worst pilot. Just like there's a worst doctor, there's a worst lawyer, there's also a worst airline pilot, and we want to design this such that the average pilot can succeed.
What will the experience be like for the passengers? You had mentioned it's all you'd mentioned, I don't know if you were talking about pricing or is it going to look like business class?
So pricing wise, it'll be like what people pay in business class today.
Okay.
Within, we're nominal fare, I think $5,000 round trip will be very profitable on this airplane. I know that's not for everybody, but that's a pretty good business class price.
Is that CONUS? Is that OCONUS?
Round trip across the Atlantic would be about $5,000. CONUS round trip could be less than that.
Okay.
But on board the airplane, we wanted. So years before I started Boom, I'd get on commercial airplanes, I'd look around, and I'd think, man, like, what if this thing was designed by Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive? And I just notice the number of seams and gaps from the outside of the airplane to the inside of a window. Notice. I'll say something you can't unsee it once you've heard this. If you look at the window, the underside of the overhead bin in the window seat on every commercial airplane, you'll notice there's this little brown splotch in every row. Why? It's because when people stand up, they bump their head, and their hair schmutz gets on the underside of the bin. And you just look all through these things. They're so thoughtlessly designed. And the airplane's made by one company, and the interior is made by another company, and they're kind of just smushed together. And so we said we were going to design the airplane and the interior together. And we hired some great designers. We were very careful to pick ones that had never done an airplane before, because we wanted some fresh thinking. Mm-hmm. And we've got something we haven't revealed yet, but it's I'm pretty excited about it. And it's something that would not be possible if we hadn't designed the airplane and the engine together, and if we hadn't designed the airplane and the interior together. Both of those were big unlocks for the kind of cabin we were able to create.
When's that getting revealed?
Maybe next year. I don't know. We haven't decided yet.
Nice.
I could show you off the record if you come to Denver. We can let you walk through our passenger experience lab, put on some VR goggles, and see it. It's I think people are pretty excited for it.
And so, how fast are planes flying today? Let's do miles per hour.
Yeah, well, let's see. So I think of these things in terms of percentages of speed of sound, which is it's 75 to 85% of the speed of sound today on a Boeing or Airbus. If you got a high-end private jet, you can go a little bit faster. And then Overture will do 1.7 Mach, so twice as fast.
What is that ground speed?
Around 1200-ish. It varies with temperature a little bit. So it's substantially faster.
Do you feel that when you're in the jet?
No. The one thing you'll notice when you go supersonic is it's slightly smoother, and you'll be at a higher altitude, so you're above more of the weather.
So nothing.
It's completely uneventful. On Concorde, they had a big screen that would show you the speed, and whenever it went through one, they'd celebrate and bring around champagne, make a big deal out of it, because otherwise you wouldn't notice.
No kidding.
And the day I'm looking forward to is in the past. I'm sure we'll do that too. The day I'm looking forward to is when the passengers say, "Would you stop with that? I just want to get back to my movie or my book or my email." I want to make supersonic flight boring, but at first we'll make it exciting.
Are any airports? I mean, is there any airports that are giving you guys? Or maybe we're not there yet, but are they going to give you pushback about landing, taking off from?
I don't think so. I mean, we've committed that it's not going to be louder than today's airplanes, and we've committed it doesn't require infrastructure upgrades. And so, for the most part, we get calls from airports saying, "Hey, would you tell us what we need to do because we want to welcome your airplane?" And our answer is, sit back, relax. You don't have to do anything. It just works. Wow. Now, of course, I'd love to redesign airports, but we don't need to. Not for supersonic.
Some
anyway.
don't need that. But well, how are your competitors handling this, like Boeing and Airbus? They fly all over the place all the time for work, and the planes are legitimately falling apart. One of my recent flights, the overhead luggage bin fell off in the middle of. All the luggage fell on the. It's just if you fly, you know what I'm talking about. They're all outdated. Planes are falling out of the sky, and in recent history, it's just crash after crash after crash, and things catching on fire, things falling apart. They're not innovating at. It almost seems like they are purposely not innovating. It's just, let's just reuse this old shit over and over until it falls out of the sky.
I think there's some truth to that.
And then you come around with this.
Well, let me first paint a sympathetic picture here. Wright brothers forward to the first jets, every generation of airplanes was faster than the one that came before it. That was the primary vector of innovation. And then, 1973, we outlaw increases in speed. So where does that leave Boeing? Yes, in some ways it was an own goal, but let's be sympathetic for a moment. All they can do is improve the design they've already got, just iteratively tweak it, right? So if you look at Boeing's latest jetliner and you squint and you're not an aerospace engineer, it looks just like their first one. It's a tube and wing transonic airplane. Now think about what that does to kids and what industry they want to work in. I think there's a whole generation or two that did not go into aviation because the door was closed to innovation. And heck, I was one of them.
I'm not. That did not even cross. That's a damn good point.
I mean, why is Boeing, literally falling apart? There are multiple threads to that story. But one of them is when the door is shut to the most exciting innovation, you can't attract the most talented people. They literally go to other industries.
That's a damn good point. I didn't think about that. So are you getting any pushback?
From Boeing or Airbus?
Yeah.
They've got their own problems to solve. I mean, so neither Boeing nor Airbus has built an all-new airliner since 2004. 2004, Boeing and Airbus launched the 787 and the A350. And since then, they have not done any all-new products. All they've done is take their existing things and tweak them. Airbus has been largely successful at that. Boeing has been, 737 Max has been a famous disaster. And so they've really just, Boeing especially, just gotten hollowed out. And I hope they can fix the company. Boeing's the only U.S. maker of airliners. There are only two in the world. There's Boeing and Airbus. That's it. And Boeing is like trying to get out of a self-destructive tailspin. They're not doing new products. They're trying to competently produce the products they already have. And it's not a good situation.
Is this like the days of McDonnell Douglas when Boeing acquired them?
Yeah, I think that's part of the story too. I mean, there's sort of there was a sort of GE mindset that made its way to Boeing through McDonnell Douglas. That was kind of the Jack Welch playbook. That was, okay, the way you succeed in business is to know what Wall Street thinks you're going to do next quarter and beat it by a nickel. And if you do that, successfully through whatever machinations, you can make the stock price go up and to the right, and it works great until the day it doesn't. And the way you do that is by cutting a lot of long-term stuff. So the way Boeing ended up getting run was quarter to quarter. A lot of people say they got too focused on money and so they didn't care about safety. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's quite true. I mean, if you look at the results of their lack of focus on safety, it was the biggest financial disaster they'd ever had. They didn't pay off financially. The problem was their financial focus was short range, not long range. So Phil Condit left in 2004. I think he was the last good CEO over there. I'm fortunate to have him on our board now. And after that, we had people like Jim McNerney who explicitly said, hey, no more moonshots. And they meant no more new products. And I remember hearing that at the time, and I was in my 20s living in Seattle. Actually, I was living in a building called Concorde. Maybe this is my destiny.
Are you serious?
I can't make this up. It was a little condo in downtown Seattle, a building called Concorde, no E. But I remember reading that from Jim McNerney and thinking, what the heck, dude? You used to be in the literal moonshot business, and now you've just decided to give up. And by the way, if you can't attract young people before, now you definitely can't attract young people. And if you go 15, 20 years without developing a new product, you don't have anybody left who knows how to do it. Mm-hmm. And so the whole thing just devolves. At this point, by the way, we didn't mention how this is important to the country. Boeing's the number one U.S. exporter. And as you know, we've got a huge problem. We don't make things here anymore. Mm-hmm. Airplanes are one of the last things we still do. And we're fumbling that. It's a huge problem.
Yeah. Where's Airbus out of?
Toulouse, France. I mean, they're spread out all over Europe. Airbus is like approximately the European government.
Gotcha. Well, Blake, let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll get into some more stuff. Why are elite athletes and high performers using Armora colostrum? Because Armora colostrum is nature's first whole food with over 400 bioactive nutrients working at the cellular level to help build lean muscle, accelerate recovery, and to fuel performance, all without artificial stimulants or synthetic junk. Armora can help strengthen immunity, help ignite metabolism, and so much more. I've been using Armora ever since they sent me some to try. I have more energy and faster recovery after long days and workouts. Whether you're running a business, training hard, or just want an edge, Armora can help optimize your body for peak output. I've worked out a special offer for my audience. Receive 30% off your first subscription order. Go to armora.com/SRS or enter SRS to get 30% off your first subscription order. That's ARMRA.com/SRS. These statements and products have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or condition. These statements and information are not a substitute for or alternative to seeking care from your healthcare providers. Do you ever want to just turn off the news and ignore politics? I know I do. And it can be overwhelming at times, but we're citizens of a republic, and it's important to me to know and understand the United States Constitution. That's why I'm so excited that Hillsdale College is offering a brand new free online course called The Federalist. The Federalist Papers were authored by founding fathers Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, and they shaped the foundation of American democracy. They show how the Constitution created a government strong enough to protect our rights and restrained enough to prevent tyranny. I learned how checks and balances still safeguard our freedom today. The Federalist includes 10 lectures, each about 30 minutes long. There's no cost to sign up. Plus, Hillsdale offers more than 40 other online courses, and they're all free. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/SRS to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/SRS to enroll for free. hillsdale.edu/SRS. All right, Blake, we're back from the break here. And something that I wanted to cover earlier, but I missed it, is lack of traditional credentials was both a hurdle and an advantage. And so I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on how that, I mean, I could see how it would be a hurdle, but I'd like to hear you talk about how it has been a hurdle.
Yeah, well, I didn't walk in with any credentials in aerospace at all. I mean, I had my pilot's license, and that was about as close as I got. I remember the early days when I was recruiting. I'd fly down to Hawthorne, where SpaceX was, to try and recruit out of SpaceX, or fly down to Mojave, California, to recruit out of Scaled Composites. And I'd fly my little airplane I could fly myself, and that was like the only cred I had showing up to these meetings. And I remember talking to people, and there was sort of this pattern of like internet guys that want to go start airplane companies. And all the airplane guys were used to hearing pitches from internet guys that didn't make any sense. And in fact, they had a term for it. And people would say, "Oh, that's fruitcake." And I remember when I first met with the guy who ultimately became our first chief engineer. And I sat down. I think we ended up meeting at the subway at SFO Airport, because he happened to be flying through SFO, and I was like, "Great, I'll come over." And I sat down with him, and he's eating a sandwich, and I showed him the spreadsheet model of the airplane and the sizing calculations I'd learned how to do out of a textbook. And he looked at it, and he said, "No, I didn't think you'd be this far along." And then our next conversation, he's like, "Man, I've been pitched a lot of ideas by internet guys, but this one actually makes sense." So, my experience has been there's no substitute for actually knowing what I'm talking about, actually doing the work. Mm-hmm. I'd pick up, it was one of the things that I realized would have to be true about myself, is I would have to be technically deep in order to know what I was doing, make the right decisions, to be able to pick the right people and have them want to follow me. If I didn't know what I was talking about, if I was just some business guy, the great people don't want to work for bosses that don't know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So I had to learn it. And by the way, it's fun. So, so I bought every aerospace textbook that was, used for teaching at the top universities. And I've quickly found I couldn't understand them. And so I went back and I did remedial calculus and remedial physics on Khan Academy. I didn't remember anything. I hadn't had any since high school. And I just made my way through it over the course of about a year. And so I think, in some ways, walking in not knowing anything is a disadvantage, but I think it's actually mostly an advantage because I didn't want to spend a decade of my life going and getting a new degree and then going to work at Boeing or something and trying to learn it that way. I didn't want to spend that kind of time. I didn't have that kind of time. So I had to go really focus myself on first principles. And I wanted to understand the fundamentals. And it turns out that focus is incredibly powerful. For example, when I predict the performance of an airplane, there are really only 4 numbers that matter. There's aerodynamic efficiency, which is the lift to drag ratio. For every pound of airplane I hold up with my wings, how many pounds of drag do I incur? That's aerodynamic efficiency, 1 number. There's engine efficiency, something called thrust-specific fuel consumption. Pounds of fuel per pounds of thrust per hour. How much fuel does it take to create a pound of thrust and sustain it for an hour? Structural efficiency. What percentage of my overall airplane weight is the empty weight of the airplane versus fuel versus people and cargo and payload? And then last is its speed, Mach number. So if you have those 4 numbers and you've got the correct assumptions, you can set up a mission profile for an airplane and predict the entire performance of it. And so you don't have to know. So okay, and Concorde's numbers were all published. How much better than Concorde could we do? So all of that, thinking it through from first principles mattered. Or I think I mentioned earlier that, one of the other ideas I looked at and didn't do was an airline. And truth be told, I didn't actually have the courage to go double click on Supersonic first. I thought, there's no way. There's no way. But, maybe an airline. And so I built all the financial models for how an airline worked. And that turned out to be really useful because I understood airline economics. And when you go model out airline economics, the first thing you learn is the fill rate on the seats really matters. A seat that flies empty just adds cost. But filling that seat versus it being empty is like free revenue. So the fill rate, they call it load factor, that really mattered. And my point in all of this was because I had to go learn it in approximately a year, I had to focus on basic truths. But it turns out focusing on basic truths, focusing on first principles, is what helped me see what other people had missed.
You had mentioned something a little earlier too that resonated with me. I think we were talking about the interior of the airplane, and you didn't want to hire the traditional designers of basically that design the traditional commercial air transportation. And it registered with me because I'm in entertainment. I found myself in entertainment, hate entertainment, the industry. And I had gotten involved with managers and agents and all this other shit, and it wasn't really working for me. And what I've realized is there seems to be a roadmap, and everybody follows the exact same roadmap. You got to come out with this type of a product. You got to do this, all these different things. And when I started this, I looked at podcasts and I was like, okay, this is what everybody's doing. How can I make what I'm doing as different as I possibly can and create a better experience? I think I've done that. And then, like I said, I got involved with entertainment, very unimpressive industry, by my standards. And so when I started to scale out the company, which actually was just about 6 months ago, to find somebody to run it, if entertainment was on your resume, it went right in the trash.
Yeah.
And so I hired my COO, Eric. He was in the energy sector. And in one of my main point to him was, do not look at the entertainment podcast roadmap. I don't want to do that. I want to do shit that I think is cool, that I like, that I want to do, start new businesses. I don't want this mold. And
Very wise.
that's the direction that we're heading in now. We have a lot of different products that are going to be rolling out later this year that have nothing to do with podcasting. Some of it has to do with tech. I'm really excited about it. But I guess what I'm getting at is none of that would have happened had I done, the typical roadmap in the box entertainment podcast type thinking.
Right.
And so when you mentioned that about the interior of the planes, it was like, good job, Sean. you're doing it right.
I think, you could do it the other way and you end up like everybody else.
Yeah.
But the world doesn't need more of what the world's already got. The world needs more of what you, you, Sean, or you, me, or you, anybody, can uniquely bring.